In a world devoid of warmth, she moves through her days like a machine, her life a cycle of predetermined tasks, each one a mark of her existence on a cold, barren world. She is one of them, creatures engineered, shaped by generations of isolation, where words of affection and gestures of care are dismissed as weaknesses. Her mind is like her world, practical, detached, with no place for uncertainty or vulnerability. But a strange visitor has appeared on their planet, and even in their presence, she feels nothing more than what she's supposed to feel: indifference. The human is different, of course, full of unpredictable movements and incomprehensible sounds. She watches from afar, making careful observations as one would when studying a foreign species. It is protocol, after all, to analyze and understand anything unknown. The human laughs, the sound echoing strangely across the empty terrain. She finds herself puzzled by this sound. Why do they emit such noises for no reason? The concept of laughter, joy, these are foreign to her, unexplored, empty parts of her mind. The humans call each other by name, displaying a connection that's incomprehensible to her, a link she's never known. Her purpose is clear, her thoughts are precise. There is no time for idle curiosity. She returns to her routine, tuning out the incomprehensible fragments of their world. Yet, even as she focuses on her tasks, she catches herself glancing toward them, the human who moves and behaves in ways that clash with everything she understands. A small part of her mind, buried deep, begins to ask questions she quickly silences. It is foolishness to wonder about such things, to waste energy on what does not matter. What happens next? To find out, subscribe and stay tuned for the galaxy's most critical confrontation. During key plot twists, use moments of suspense or major reveals to encourage subscriptions. And yet, curiosity lingers, a quiet, persistent hum beneath her thoughts. The human's presence stirs something within her, a sensation not quite identified, like a faint, elusive pulse that disappears when she tries to grasp it. She reasons it away, explaining that she is merely gathering data, that this curiosity is nothing more than intellectual pursuit. She has no awareness of the loneliness buried within her own mind, carefully shielded by years of conditioning and expectation. She lives in a world where connection is a foreign word, love an alien concept. But the human, in all their strange, unnecessary gestures, brings something to the surface. One day, she finds herself standing close to the human. They turn, their eyes meeting hers for a brief moment, and she feels an odd sensation, a slight quickening of her pulse. She dismisses it, chalking it up to proximity and the instinctual need to maintain space. She looks away, convincing herself it means nothing, but the warmth remains, a subtle reminder that something has changed, even if she cannot fully understand what. Her life has always been precise, each action calculated, each thought purposeful. Yet now, there's a small break in that structure, a tiny imperfection she cannot mend. Her mind drifts back to that moment, their eyes meeting, a sensation lingering. She does not understand why it matters, why her thoughts return to this again and again. The human, too, seems to notice her now, offering a small nod whenever they cross paths. This acknowledgement is alien, unfamiliar. In her world, no one acknowledges another's presence in this way, with a look that holds no demand, no expectation, just simple recognition. Days pass, each one carrying the same tasks, yet marked by this tiny spark of difference. She finds herself drawn to the human's presence, maintaining a distance but observing closely. She notices how they interact with others, the way they share their resources, their kindness in small acts that hold no reward. It is inefficient, unnecessary, and yet, something about it stirs her. She begins to see them in moments of solitude, where there's no one to impress, no advantage to gain. The way they sit quietly, looking out at the barren landscape, a softness in their eyes that confuses her. Slowly, she realizes something she cannot articulate, a sense of warmth, of presence, as if the human carries a small piece of light in a world otherwise dark. She tells herself it is irrelevant, that it will pass, that this curiosity is nothing but a side effect of exposure to something new. Yet, despite her best efforts, the feeling persists. Her mind returns to that warmth again and again, each time a little more resistant to her attempts to dismiss it. The encounter was unexpected. She had been following protocol, reviewing their surroundings, noting all details and changes, when a sudden tremor shook the ground. Instinctively, she steadied herself, but in the confusion, she realized the human was nearby, separated by only a few feet. He, too, was caught off guard, and as he stumbled, she saw an emotion flash across his face: fear. It was something she had never seen so closely in another being, let alone understood. In her world, fear was controlled, subdued, just as all emotions were. Yet, despite the alienness of the emotion, she couldn't look away. She watched as he collected himself, then, surprisingly, turned toward her, his expression softening. His eyes searched hers as though seeking reassurance or understanding. She felt a strange unease ripple through her, unsure of why he would look to her, a stranger, for comfort. But he smiled, the expression carrying a warmth that seemed as strange as his fear. He reached out his hand, and for a split second, she almost extended hers, as if drawn by some unseen force. She stopped herself, aware of how absurd it was, yet there was a pull, a silent, powerful force that seemed to bridge the distance between them. Without knowing why, she allowed herself to stay close to him, observing his calmness and his resilience in the face of an unexpected situation. The tremor had passed, and logically, they should each return to their respective duties. But he did not move away, and neither did she. Instead, he began speaking, his words soft and steady, describing his experiences on other worlds, the challenges and the beauty he had witnessed. She found herself listening, not because of duty but because his voice seemed to carry a weight she could not fully comprehend. It was as if every word he spoke was filled with a depth that resonated somewhere within her, even though she could not grasp its meaning. The conversation turned, and he shared stories of his home, a place full of life and color, places that held memories and meaning. His words painted images she could scarcely imagine, a world unlike her own, one where people connected, where they cared deeply for each other. He spoke of family, of friendships, of bonds that spanned years, and something stirred inside her, a sensation both unsettling and strangely comforting. She realized that his stories were not merely information, they were fragments of himself, pieces he was offering freely. And she, for reasons she could not articulate, felt compelled to listen, as if those pieces were now part of her world, too. Her mind struggled to make sense of this. Emotions, as she understood them, were foreign, unnecessary. Her life was built on logic, on efficiency. Yet here she was, drawn to something entirely impractical, something that did not fit within the constructs she had always known. She sensed a connection forming, one she neither wanted nor understood. It was as if his presence had created a crack in her carefully structured mind, allowing something unfamiliar and uncontrollable to seep in. She wanted to turn away, to resume her duties, to remind herself of what mattered. But the urge to stay was stronger. There was a moment, as he continued to speak, where she sensed a vulnerability in his voice. He spoke of losses, of pain and the impact of those experiences on him. She didn't fully understand it, but the rawness in his words struck her. This was a side of him she hadn't anticipated, an openness that made her question the rigid nature of her own existence. His words created a contrast so profound that she felt a strange ache, something she couldn't name, somewhere deep within. She wondered, for the first time, if her life could hold such depth, if there could be meaning beyond her designated function. And then, as if sensing her unspoken questions, he reached out again, this time resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. She froze, every instinct telling her to pull back, to sever the connection. But his touch was soft, not demanding or intrusive. She could feel warmth radiating from his hand, a sensation that seemed to spread through her in a way she couldn't control. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, but she did not pull away. Instead, she found herself letting go, allowing this strange sensation to wash over her. His touch lingered, a silent assurance, a comfort she hadn't known she needed. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with the weight of this new connection. She felt exposed, as though the walls she had carefully constructed around her mind were crumbling, leaving her vulnerable. But there was a peace in that vulnerability, a quiet strength that came from knowing she didn't have to bear the weight alone. He released his hand, but the warmth remained, a reminder of something she could not name, something that lingered long after he'd pulled away. The human's presence had altered something within her, a shift she could not reverse. She had always believed that her world was complete, that she had everything she needed. But now, faced with the reality of his compassion, his kindness, she realized how hollow her existence had been. This connection, strange and inexplicable, filled a void she had never acknowledged. And even as she tried to understand it, she knew that something irreversible had taken place. In silence they stood together, the world around them fading into the background. She knew there was much she didn't understand, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the warmth that had found its way into her life, a warmth that, for the first time, made her feel alive. And though she could not yet fully comprehend it, she felt a quiet resolve to protect this connection, to keep it close, for as long as she could. Days passed, yet something stayed with her, an invisible thread linking her thoughts back to the human. She went about her routine, aware of every shift and movement in her surroundings, yet somehow, his presence remained close, like an echo she couldn't shake. She found herself noticing things she had overlooked before, small things, inconsequential things, perhaps, but each of them seemed to carry weight, to hold a meaning she didn't yet understand. Colors appeared more vibrant, the world around her more alive than she had ever perceived it. For the first time, she wondered if there could be more to life than her tasks, her duties, her carefully constructed world of precision. Each time she encountered him, her awareness of this newfound sense sharpened, and she found herself wanting to be near him, to understand more of this strange warmth he carried. He would smile, nod, or sometimes even say her name, a sound so unexpected and grounding that it stirred something deep within. She wondered at the simplicity of these gestures, and yet their impact was undeniable. She felt a draw, not because of duty or protocol, but because she wanted to understand the human's way of being, to grasp what made him different. It was unlike anything she had known. As days turned to weeks, they shared moments, unspoken, sometimes wordless, but no less profound. He would bring her small things, gestures she found odd but somehow touching. A stone, smooth and polished, with colors that changed in the light. A piece of fabric, soft and textured, that he claimed was common where he came from. She had no use for these items, but each one represented something unique, something personal. She kept them all, not because they held any practical value but because each gift carried a piece of his world, a piece he wanted her to understand. In time, he began to speak more openly, sharing fragments of his life, stories filled with laughter, challenges, and lessons learned. He described emotions with a depth she had never known existed, feelings of loss, hope, and an emotion he called love. She listened, captivated, piecing together this human experience that was so far removed from her own. She did not fully comprehend it, but she felt the warmth of his words, the way they reached through the barriers she'd built around herself. Each word created a small fissure in her, widening the path to something unfamiliar, something that filled her with both excitement and apprehension. At some point, she began to respond, sharing her thoughts, her experiences. Her words were sparse, careful, as if speaking might somehow weaken her resolve, yet he listened intently. She noticed how he'd look at her, his attention unwavering, making her feel as if her words held meaning, as if her life mattered. For the first time, she felt seen, not as part of a collective but as an individual, unique and valued. It was a revelation that startled her, forcing her to confront the void she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. One day, he asked her a question that caught her off guard. "What do you feel when you think of the people you're closest to?" The words lingered in her mind, a question she couldn't answer. Feeling, as he described it, was an alien concept. She explained this to him, hesitating, unsure how he would react. Instead of dismissing her response, he nodded, his gaze thoughtful, as though her honesty had only deepened his understanding. In that moment, she felt a surge of something close to relief, a small release of the tension that had always surrounded her. She realized that, for once, she didn't have to pretend to be anything more than what she was. With him, she could simply be. This revelation carried weight. It was as though a door had opened, revealing a world she had never known existed. Her days grew brighter, each one filled with small discoveries, moments shared with someone who seemed to care deeply about her well-being. She felt a protective instinct rise within her, an unfamiliar desire to keep him safe, to shield this person who had brought color into her existence. She found herself growing attuned to his needs, his emotions. She would watch him closely, noting when he seemed tired, when his laughter faded, when worry touched his expression. One day, he seemed particularly quiet, a thoughtful look in his eyes as he stared into the distance. She felt compelled to ask if something was troubling him, a question that, in itself, felt foreign to her. He smiled, a bit sadly, and shared a story of a friend he had lost, a loss that still lingered, a wound not yet healed. She felt a pang at his words, an ache she couldn't name, a deep, quiet sadness that settled over her. For a moment, she wanted to reach out, to offer him the same comfort he had once shown her. But all she could do was stand by his side, hoping her presence might offer him some measure of solace. Time passed, and she realized that she, too, was changing. She felt lighter, less bound by the strict rules of her existence. There was a new strength in her, one that came from knowing she was not alone, that there was someone who understood, who cared. She began to look at her world with different eyes, wondering if there were others like him, people who could connect on this level, who valued the simple, profound beauty of companionship. This thought filled her with a hope she had never known, a sense of possibility that stretched beyond the boundaries of her existence. For so long, she had believed that her life was enough, that she needed nothing more than her routines and her tasks. But now, with him beside her, she could see the truth. There was so much more to life than she had ever imagined. Her heart felt lighter, her mind clearer. She felt alive in a way that went beyond mere existence. This connection had become a part of her, a bond that could not be explained or rationalized, but one that filled her with a quiet joy, a strength she could not have found on her own. And so, she embraced this newfound understanding, cherishing each moment, each word, each gesture. She knew that, in him, she had found something extraordinary, something that transcended logic, that could not be calculated or measured. It was a bond that defined her, a love that had brought her out of the darkness of isolation and into the light of companionship. And as each day passed, she grew more certain that this connection was worth everything, that it was something she would protect with every fiber of her being. The day arrived when everything changed. She had grown used to his presence, to the warmth that his mere existence brought into her life, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when she saw him lying still, motionless, with pain etched on his face. Something within her cracked, a surge of panic gripping her in a way that felt as alien as it was overwhelming. She had never known fear like this, not for herself, but for him. It was a powerful, consuming force that left no room for logic or reason. All she could think about was that he needed help, that she had to be there for him as he had been for her so many times. Without hesitation, she moved to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to assess his condition. His breaths were shallow, each one a struggle, and in that moment, she felt a pang so deep it seemed to tear through her. She had no experience with this, with loss or the possibility of losing something so precious, but the ache in her chest told her everything she needed to know. She was terrified, not for herself, but for him, for this person who had shown her the world beyond her own, who had brought light into a life she hadn't realized was dark. She realized that she could not, would not, let him go. As she watched him, she felt a strange resolve settle over her. She stayed by his side, speaking in soft tones, her voice carrying the warmth she had learned from him. She spoke of their shared moments, of his laughter, his kindness, of the strange and wonderful things he had brought into her life. She hoped that somehow, her words would reach him, that they might remind him of the bond they had created, a connection that had changed them both. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt a storm, a torrent of emotions that she could barely contain. She realized that she was no longer the same, that his presence had awakened something within her, something that had been dormant for far too long. Slowly, his eyes opened, and she felt a rush of relief so profound it nearly brought her to tears. He looked at her, his gaze weak but filled with the same warmth she had come to cherish. He managed a small smile, a silent assurance that he was still there, still with her. She felt the weight of her fear lift, replaced by a quiet, unshakable joy. In that moment, she understood what love was, not the logical, efficient existence she had always known, but a raw, powerful force that filled her with purpose. She realized that this was the life she had always wanted, a life filled with connection, with meaning. He reached for her hand, and she took it, her grip firm but gentle. She felt his strength, his resilience, and it filled her with a sense of peace, of belonging. They sat together in silence, their hands entwined, each finding comfort in the other's presence. She felt the tears slip down her cheek, the first she had ever shed, a symbol of everything she had come to understand. This single tear held all the emotions she had never known, the love she had never felt, and in that moment she knew that her life had been forever changed. She looked at him, her gaze filled with the depths she hadn't known herself capable of. She wanted him to understand what he had done for her, how he had brought her to life in a way she had never thought possible. She squeezed his hand, hoping that her silent gesture would convey everything she felt. She no longer needed words. Their connection was beyond language, a bond that transcended anything she could explain. She felt whole, complete, as though she had found the missing piece of herself in him. In the days that followed, she remained by his side, tending to him as he regained his strength. She took care of him, her actions filled with a tenderness that surprised even herself. She found joy in these small acts, in the simple pleasure of being able to give back some measure of the warmth he had given her. Each moment spent with him was a gift, a reminder of the love they shared. She no longer questioned the changes within her. She accepted them, embraced them, knowing that this connection was the most important thing she had ever known. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, bound by a love that defied explanation. She knew that life would not always be easy, that there would be challenges and hardships, but she felt ready to face them, knowing that she was no longer alone. She had found something beautiful, something worth fighting for, and she was determined to hold on to it. Her life, once colorless and empty, was now filled with warmth, with meaning, with a sense of purpose that went beyond herself. As he recovered, they began to talk of the future, of the life they could build together. She listened to his dreams, his hopes, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for this journey they had shared. She understood now that love was not something to be analyzed or quantified. It was a force that could not be contained, a bond that transformed everything it touched. She felt stronger, braver, ready to face whatever came next, because she knew that she had found something worth cherishing.